You're listening to the free ad-sponsored re-release of American Election's Wicked Game, a weekly march through every presidential election from 1789 to 2024. To listen to all episodes right now ad-free, go to intohistory.com. Subscribers there enjoy ad-free listening, early access, bonus content, and more from a growing collection of great history podcasts. Start your free trial today at intohistory.com. It's 1894 in Cleveland, Ohio. Immigrants from Poland are gathered at the only Polish Roman Catholic church in the city. Mass has just begun, but two young men still linger in the hallway. "Brother, we're late. Hurry." "What's the point, Waldeck?" "We must pray. Pray to God. We must pray for our jobs back." Up until recently, Waldeck and his brother worked at the Newburgh wire mills. It was grueling work. Long 10-hour days earned the brothers just $8 a week. Days ago, the Polish workers at the mill went on strike for better wages, but when the strike was broken, all of them, including the two brothers, were fired. "During the strike, I prayed, and God did not answer me then." "Brother, don't say such things." "I did as the priest said. I prayed. God did not help us." The panic of 1893 has hit the country hard, but no one feels the pain of the economic depression more than the immigrants of the working class. For Poles like Waldeck and his brother, losing their jobs is catastrophic. Most turn to the church for hope, but some are turning to other places. "You must have faith, little brother." "No, I must have proof. The day we were fired, I went and bought myself a Polish Bible. I have now read it 4 or 5 times. We've been deceived, Waldeck. The priests have kept back much of what it says." "Quiet. What are you saying?" "I'm saying we've been lied to." "And why would they do that? Why would they lie to us?" "So we keep paying them part of our meager wages. The priest trade is the same as the shoemakers or any other." "How can you say such things?" "Because my eyes have been opened. I know the truth now. It's been shown to me." He pulls out a red book and hands it to Waldeck. Chill runs down Waldeck's neck when he sees a picture of a devil on its cover. "And what is this?" "It's called The Free Thinker. I've learned so much. This is from the anarchists, and they're not as bad as the papers say. I've been reading their pamphlets, attending their meetings. You should too. All workers should." "Leon, you're scaring me." No, I'm not scaring you. The truth I speak might be, but you must not be scared of the truth, Waldeck. I am not. If anything, the truth has given me courage, given me the desire to learn more. I'm going to a meeting tonight. You should join me." Waldeck soon began attending anarchist meetings with his brother Leon. The two consumed all they could read. Leon then took things one step further. He began seeking out leaders of the anarchist movement, such as the radical activist Emma Goldman. The anarchists called for fundamental economic and political change, but for Leon Czolgosz, the change would not come fast enough. After the election of 1900, he would take matters into his own hands, and with the squeeze of a trigger, he would forever change the course of American history. Wicked Game is sponsored by BetterHelp. It's been especially busy around the studio this month. We launched a new podcast with another one coming, so trying to find the time to get everything done has been a challenge. There sometimes just aren't enough hours in the day, you know? But what if there was? What if someone gave you a 25th hour? How would you use it? You could sleep in. You could actually take a lunch maybe. You could go on a walk. I mean, this is the most precious, limited resource we have, time. A lot of us wish we had more time, but you need to ask, time for what? Do you know what's important to you and how to make it a priority? Therapy can help find what matters to you so you can do more of it. And as the world's largest therapy service, BetterHelp has matched 3 million people with professionally licensed and vetted therapists available 100% online. Plus, it's affordable. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to match with a therapist. But if things aren't clicking, you can easily switch to a new therapist anytime. Couldn't be simpler. No waiting rooms, no traffic. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/elections today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/elections. Wicked Game is sponsored by Factor. It's been a busy month for me. We launched a new podcast with another one coming soon, all while keeping 6 others that we work on going strong. So I'll be frank, it's been stressful and time-consuming. What could be a perfect storm of conditions to ruin my healthy eating habits. It's so easy to go grab drive-thru, right? But I didn't, because there's Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit. Chef-prepared, dietitian-approved, ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door with over 35 different options every week to choose from, including keto, calorie smart, vegan, veggie, all the ways you want to eat healthy. And there's even more to enjoy with over 55 nutrition-packed add-ons that'll help make your weekly meal planning even more delicious. And I'm dead serious when I tell you they hit the spot. Not only are they tasty, but satisfying, something you don't often get in nutritious food. Plus, it's all ready in just 2 minutes. No prep, no mess. Perfect for your most busy, stressful times, and all the rest, too. Head to factormeals.com/wickedgame50 and use code wickedgame50 to get 50% off. That's code wickedgame50 at factormeals.com/wickedgame50 to get 50% off. From Airship, I'm Lindsey Graham, and this is American Elections Wicked Game. In 1897, America was emerging from the worst economic crisis the country had ever seen. The election of 1896 ushered in a new era of prosperity for the country. President McKinley followed through with his campaign promise of a full dinner pail for every American. Families again had food on their tables, but for many, it wasn't enough. The masses were growing tired of prosperity not being shared by all. The end of the 19th century was a period defined by change, innovation, and expansion. The very idea of America was growing, and for the first time, the United States expanded from her continental borders to become an American empire. But the price of American imperialism was a war with the fading Spanish Empire, and further American expansion in the Philippines saw America on the wrong side of a battle for independence. The election of 1900 would celebrate American exceptionalism and set the stage for massive economic and political reforms. The election would usher in a new progressive era. It would give rise to a new political hero and ultimately cause the downfall of another. This is episode 29, 1900, McKinley versus Bryan, the rise and fall of empires. It's February 15, 1898, aboard a U.S. battleship in Havana Harbor. Captain Charles D. Sigsbee sits in his quarters writing a letter home. As he writes, Marine bugler Newton plays taps to signal lights out to the sailors. Captain Sigsbee lays down his pen and listens to the beautiful strains. His ship, the Maine, arrived in Havana weeks ago. When the Cuban War of Independence began 3 years before, Spain launched a brutal campaign to squash the rebellion. American sympathies are with the Cuban insurgents. The USS Maine has been sent to both protect American interests and to check the tyranny of Spain. As the bugler finishes, Captain Sigsbee completes his letter, but before he can stuff it into the envelope, the electric lights in the cabin go out. For the captain, there is nothing but blackness and smoke. The ship is listing to the port side. Captain Sigsbee gropes his way through the cabin into the passage where he runs into Marine Corps Private William Anthony. Captain, the ship is sinking. I know, Private. We must get topside. The two make their way to the main deck. Black smoke plumes from the ship. What's the time, Private? The time, sir? I need to know when we were struck. The explosion took place at 9:40, sir. Place sentries around the ship. Are we under attack, sir? We must assume that we are at war, Private. Things have been tense between America and Spain. The United States has been supporting the Cuban revolutionaries. Some are eager to make Cuba a new territory of the United States. Spain considers the presence of the American Navy a threat to their interests. Sigsbee saw the writing on the wall. Now they are under attack. Place those sentries. I need eyes on the water. Aye, Captain. The captain surveys the damage. One of the smokestacks lies in the water on the starboard side. The ship is sinking rapidly. His men are tending to the wounded, choking on the smoke from a massive fire burning midship. Captain Sigsbee, no report of any ships, but with all the smoke, it's really hard. Tell those men to keep watch. For now, we must get those fires out. Flood the forward compartment. The compartment's already underwater, Captain. There's nothing more to be done. Shh, you hear that? There, Captain, men overboard. Get boats in the water, now. Most of the boats are badly damaged. Send what we have. We must save those men. Sailors jump into the remaining boats and row through the smoke over dark water. They rescue who they can. The fire on board becomes fiercer. Suddenly, the spare ammunition that had been stowed in the pilot house ignites. Sir, the boats are back. Bring the wounded on board. Sir, I don't believe we should. If anything, we should join them in the boats. While this ship is still above water, we will not abandon her. But Captain, the fire has reached the forward magazine. Told you to get those fires out. It's hopeless, sir. And if that magazine explodes, it will kill us all. We must abandon ship. Captain Sigsbee is reluctant to leave his ship, but he must think of the lives of his crew. Abandon ship. By the time the ship was evacuated, the main had sunk low enough that the deck was almost level with the lifeboats. As is custom, Captain Sigsbee was the last to leave. As they rowed to shore, the captain surveyed the bodies of his men floating in the water. 268 men, over 2/3 of his crew, were dead. The bugler, Newton, who Captain Sigsbee had listened to just a half hour before, was among them. Taps was the last song he ever played. On March 2, 1897, 2 days before his inauguration, Republican President-elect William McKinley had been invited to the White House by outgoing Democratic President Grover Cleveland. There, Cleveland warned McKinley about the expansionist agenda of many in Congress. In his inaugural address, McKinley had declared, "We want no wars of conquest. We must avoid the temptation of territorial aggression. War should never be entered upon until every agency of peace has failed." But the sinking of the Maine would force a reluctant McKinley to wage exactly what he cautioned against, a war of conquest. While McKinley hoped to avoid war, many Americans had been chomping at the bit for a conflict. European countries like England, Germany, and France were aggressively expanding their empires in Africa and Asia. The dominant naval power in the Americas, the Spanish Empire, had been on the decline. Smelling blood in the water, American speculators salivated at the prospect of Spain abandoning its imperial conquests. Trade routes, mineral deposits, and fertile land were all up for grabs if Spain retreated from the region. Many speculators had set their sights on the neighboring island of Cuba. The fertile island was perfect for growing fruit, sugarcane, and tobacco. Many had hoped that a Cuban revolution would free the country from the Spanish Empire, but the revolution had not been going well. The Cubans had demanded independence. Spain aggressively countered the rebellion. The Spanish crown launched a scorched earth campaign, burning homes and crops and rounding up the freedom fighters in concentration camps. This inhumane treatment of the rebels allowed American speculators to voice moral outrage and advocate for war. Then the pro-war element of the American press gave voice to that outrage, and the expansionists in Congress began to beat the drums of war. Yet outgoing President Cleveland and incoming President McKinley had both been unwilling to get blood on their hands. During the campaign of 1896, Theodore Roosevelt had said of McKinley, "He is not a strong man. I should feel rather uneasy about him in a serious crisis. I do hope he will take a strong stand about Cuba." McKinley had not wished to start a war with Spain. He himself had seen war. McKinley was the last veteran of the Civil War to serve as president. He had written to a friend, "I have been through one war. I have seen the dead piled up, and I do not want to see another." But despite McKinley's wishes, an American tragedy dropped war directly in his lap. On February 15, 1898, when the USS Maine exploded off the coast of Cuba, 2/3 of the 350-man crew were killed. An immediate investigation into the Maine explosion was launched by the U.S. Naval Board of Inquiry. They concluded that the cause of the explosion was a mine placed beneath the ship. The result of the inquiry was plain. It was an act of war. 75 years later, that inquiry would be challenged. A modern investigation would determine that the blast most likely came from within the ship. They would come to the conclusion that the cause of the Maine explosion was probably not a mine, but simply an accident, a spontaneous ignition of coal stored next to the reserve magazine. But in 1898, without modern investigative tools, the mine theory was widely embraced, and in the heat of the moment, the mere accusation of a cowardly and dastardly attack by Spain caused public outrage. This outrage gave war advocates just the excuse they craved for action. The sensationalist newspapers of William Randolph Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer cried out for retaliation. Known for their yellow journalism, these papers exaggerated the story and played on public fear. Headlines proclaimed, "Spanish treachery. They claimed destruction of the warship Maine was the work of an enemy. William Hearst even offered a reward in his New York Journal, $50,000 for information leading to the perpetrator of the Maine outrage. The press convinced Americans that the Spanish were responsible, and they swayed public opinion towards war. Everyone rallied around the call, "Remember the Maine, to hell with Spain." Congress also clamored for retribution. Many wanted a declaration of war. The pressure on President McKinley was immense, and yet McKinley resisted. A close friend later told the story that, in private, the situation made McKinley weep like a 13-year-old boy. McKinley told his friend, "I have not slept over 3 hours a night for over 2 weeks. Congress is trying to drive us into war with Spain. The Spanish fleet is in Cuban waters, and we haven't enough ammunition on the Atlantic seacoast to fire a salute." But for pro-war expansionists, the sinking of the Maine had given them all the ammunition they needed. There was a popular joke of President McKinley at the time. Why is the president's mind like his bed? Because someone has to make it up for him before he can use it. The men of President McKinley's cabinet certainly knew this to be true. They joined Congress in the call for war, and when McKinley resisted, some took action to sway his opinion. McKinley's Secretary of War, Russell Alger, secretly approached the powerful senator from Massachusetts, Henry Cabot Lodge. Lodge was a vocal advocate for American imperialism. Secretary of War Alger begged the senator to pressure the president to declare war. For Alger, the reasoning was purely political. The majority of public opinion was behind the war. If the Republicans wanted to remain the dominant party, they must embrace the popular opinion. Secretary Alger warned McKinley that if he did not declare war, he was in danger of ruining himself and the Republican Party by standing in the way of the people's wishes. The cacophony of voices calling for war was deafening, and finally the president gave in. On April 11, 1898, McKinley asked Congress for a declaration of war with Spain. Primary reason he cited in helping Cuba was its close proximity to the country. McKinley said, "It is especially our duty, for it is right at our door." He publicly accepted the theory that the Maine had been sunk by a Spanish mine. He chastised the Spanish government for their failure, as he put it, to assure safety and security to a vessel of the American Navy in the harbor of Havana on a mission of peace. On April 21, 1898, the Republican-controlled Congress held votes on a declaration of war with Spain. The Senate voted 42-35 for the measure. The House overwhelmingly voted for war, 310-6. Critics of the declaration claimed the war was solely one of conquest. To answer these accusations, Congress also passed the Teller Amendment, which limited the conflict to solely aiding Cuba in its rebellion. It prohibited Cuba's annexation, and once the conflict was over, the U.S. would leave. Congress also voted to give McKinley $50 million to strengthen the U.S. military. Volunteers enthusiastically lined up to enlist. In June, 17,000 troops landed in Cuba, meeting little resistance. The conflict with Spain, which became known as the Splendid Little War, would redefine U.S. foreign policy. It would also create new battle lines, which would define the election fight of 1900. Wicked Game is sponsored by NetSuite. Here's some quick and easy math. The less your business spends on operations, on multiple systems, on delivering your product or service, the more profit you have and the more money you keep. But with higher expenses on materials, employees, distribution, and borrowing, everything costs more these days. So to reduce costs and the headaches associated with them, switch to NetSuite, the #1 cloud financial system, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, HR, all into one platform and one source of truth. And with NetSuite, you'll also reduce IT costs because NetSuite lives in the cloud, no hardware required, and accessible from anywhere. You cut the cost of maintaining multiple systems because now you've got one unified business management suite. And you improve efficiency by bringing all of your major business processes into one platform, slashing manual tasks and errors. Over 37,000 companies have already made the move, so do the math for yourself. See how you'll profit with NetSuite this year. Now through April 15th, NetSuite is offering a one-of-a-kind flexible financing program. Head to netsuite.com/elections. That's netsuite.com/elections. netsuite.com/elections.
At the time, I only felt a punch.
I think everything went wrong.
His drug of choice was heroin.
Binging and purging over and over and over.
Evaluate you, and if you're okay to go, they're going to let you go.
This is Justin, and I do the Peripheral podcast. I have a true crime background, but When telling the stories of true crime, sometimes you have to gloss over topics like mental illness, drug addiction, sexual assault. And I feel like we do that in life too. So this podcast is my attempt to bring all of these topics that are on the peripheral into the mainstream. So please join me wherever you listen to podcasts.
It's July 1st, 1898, in a small village in Cuba. American forces are launching an offensive against the Spanish fortifications atop San Juan Hill. The 9th and 10th Black Cavalry Regiments, known as the Buffalo Soldiers, lead the charge. Forced to abandon their horses, the Buffalo Soldiers must take the hill on foot, but under heavy fire, their valiant advance is repelled. They find cover at the bottom of the hill.
Hold this position, men. When the order's given, we'll take that hill at all hazards.
But no orders have come, and this captain's men have suffered heavy losses from Spanish gunfire from above. Retreat would make them open targets. They're pinned down, with nowhere to run. Just then, from the nearby jungle, a spectacled man on horseback emerges from the trees and charges toward them. More cavalrymen follow him, and even more troops follow on foot. It's the 1st Volunteer Cavalry Regiment, otherwise known as the Rough Riders. When the spectacled man in the sombrero reaches the bottom of the hill, he jumps off his horse and grins at the pinned-down officer.
Captain, me and my boys are here to help. Glad to see you, but we can't move from this position. You've got us pinned down. That's why I'm here, Captain. My orders to help you and the regulars take that hill. I've received no such orders, and we're holding this position. We can't take those hills just by firing at them, Captain. And what do you suggest we do? Well, I have a bully of an idea. I intend to rush them.
The Rough Riders are a ragtag group of volunteers, a motley group of frontiersmen, Ivy League athletes, Texas Rangers, and Native Americans. They all enlisted for the adventure and glory of battle. The spectacled man leading them, Theodore Roosevelt, is determined to take the hill and the glory that comes with it.
I will keep my men lying where they are. We will not advance until I have orders which say otherwise. Captain, do you know where the colonel is? No, sir. Have you been in communication with him? No, sir. Then I am the ranking officer here, and I give the order to charge. I will not move without an order from the colonel. Captain, do you want your men to die on that hill of yours? No, sir. Then let my riders through.
When Theodore Roosevelt started his charge up the hill, several of the Buffalo Soldiers, who had been eager to make the advance, joined Roosevelt and the Rough Riders. Together, the group of white, black, and Native American soldiers resolutely sprang up the hill, cheering and running forward between firing shots. Richard Harding Davis, a reporter who observed the charge, described it this way. They had no glittering bayonets. They were not massed in regular array. There were a few men in advance, bunched together, and creeping up a steep, sunny hill, the top of which roared and flashed with flame. The men held their guns pressed across their breast and stepped heavily as they climbed. They walked to greet death at every step. It was a miracle of self-sacrifice, a triumph of bulldog courage, which one watched breathless with wonder. The Spaniards atop the hill fled the charge, and the Rough Riders took the summit. In July of 1898, Theodore Roosevelt emerged from Cuba a national hero. His legendary charge up San Juan Hill launched him quickly into the governor's mansion of New York and soon into Washington politics. The United States emerged from Cuba an empire. The splendid little war was just that, relatively small compared to other conflicts. It lasted only 3 months and cost the U.S. only 400 casualties. But Cuba was free, which boded well for the speculators. And though the Teller Amendment prevented the annexation of Cuba, the spoils of war were still monumental for the United States. It gained both Puerto Rico and Guam. The American Empire was born, and President McKinley reigned. The war was also a huge success for the U.S. Navy. On May 1, 1898, just 10 days after the declaration of war with Spain, the U.S. had proven its naval might in the Battle of Manila. Manila was the capital and largest city in the Philippines. Manila was also the final resting place of the once great Spanish fleet. Outmatched by the newer American ships, the aging Spanish vessels were soundly defeated. They sank to the bottom of Manila Bay, symbolizing the final fall of the Spanish Empire. The Philippines were yet another new addition to the American Empire. But taking the Philippines would soon prove to be the first major dilemma of American imperialism, and a problem for McKinley's re-election. Most of President McKinley's constituents craved expansion. Though he had been resistant to the war with Spain, President McKinley eagerly sought to expand the country through diplomacy, so he set his sights on another strategic group of islands in the Pacific. He orchestrated a treaty to annex the island kingdom of Hawaii. At the end of the 19th century, Asia was emerging as a powerful market for trade. Like the Philippines, Hawaii would be an important stop on a trade route to China. It would also serve as an important military outpost. Japan was growing ever more aggressive in the region. A naval base in Hawaii would strategically defend the West Coast. But Japan had also set its sights on Hawaii. When Japan heard of the United States' intention to annex the islands, they sent warships in protest. But this sign of aggression only helped President McKinley push through the annexation. And on July 7, 1898, he signed the Newlands Resolution, making Hawaii a U.S. territory. As the country grew, so did the president's popularity. But a situation evolving in the Philippines threatened McKinley's popularity and any chance he had at a second term. The Philippines were a group of islands in the Pacific, surrendered by the Spanish to the United States at the end of the Spanish-American War. But unlike Guam and Puerto Rico, the situation in the Philippines was complicated. Similar to the Cubans, the Filipino people had been fighting for independence from Spain. This put President McKinley in a politically difficult position. Would the United States be a liberator or an oppressor? To many Americans, the Philippines were just simply unknown. Even President McKinley famously said, "When we received the cable from Admiral Dewey telling of the taking of the Philippines, I looked up their location on the globe. I could not have told where those darned islands were within 2,000 miles. Ultimately, McKinley chose to possess the little-known islands he had taken from Spain. This decision would lock the United States in a bloody conflict that would last the remainder of McKinley's term. He would later say, "If old Dewey had just sailed away when he smashed that Spanish fleet, what a lot of trouble he would have saved us." Almost immediately, the Filipino independence movement caused a political backlash in the United States. These islands wanted their independence, and the United States denied them their liberty. Many believed that this was antithetical to the ideas of America. Soon, an anti-imperialist league was formed. It was spearheaded by men like the Titan Andrew Carnegie, former President Grover Cleveland, and even the famous author Mark Twain. Of the Philippine occupation, Twain wrote, "I should hate to see the eagle place his talons on any other land." Even the political genius who helped McKinley win the presidency, Senator Mark Hanna, vocalized his dismay. On December 10, 1898, annexation of the Philippines passed Congress by one vote. But discontent in the Philippines was a bomb waiting to explode. A war for independence there would spark, and McKinley would find himself on the wrong side. On a sweltering night in February 1899, a group of U.S. soldiers were ambushed by Filipino forces. A tense firefight lasted throughout the night. The next morning, the leader of the Filipino Liberation Army, Emilio Aguinaldo, attempted a ceasefire, but the U.S. Army refused and went on a bloody offensive to destroy the freedom fighters. When the fighting was done, 194 American soldiers were injured, 44 were dead. The Filipinos' casualties were far worse. Over 5,000 Filipinos fighting for independence died at the hands of the United States. After this event, the conflict soon devolved into a long and costly guerrilla war. As a consequence, the anti-imperialist protests at home grew louder. Mark Twain declared that the U.S. flag should be resigned. William Jennings Bryan, McKinley's Democratic opponent in the 1896 election, quipped, "We said we are going to bring prosperity and democracy to the Filipinos, but we had better not educate them because they might learn to read the Declaration of Independence." President McKinley defended his annexing the Philippines, claiming it was not tyranny, but rather benevolent assimilation. In his eyes, the indigenous peoples there were benefiting from Christianity and Western society. The Filipinos felt otherwise. Using guerrilla tactics to hit and run American troops, they delivered the U.S. significant casualties. The Americans also suffered heavy losses from jungle diseases like malaria. And during the darkest moments of the conflict, both sides committed horrible atrocities. By the end of the conflict, 5,000 Americans would be dead. Almost 20,000 Filipinos would be killed by America's benevolent assimilation. America's first experience of war in Asia was a nightmare. So McKinley wanted a quick end to the war. He knew that a continued conflict would endanger his re-election in the coming 1900 contest, and he was right. Sensing the political weakness, Democrats pounced on the issue. Many Democrats pushed for Admiral George Dewey to run as their 1900 Democratic candidate. They felt that Dewey, the naval hero from the Battle of Manila, was the perfect choice to challenge McKinley's competency in the Philippine disaster. But Dewey's early bid for president was plagued by gaffes. First, he claimed that being president was much like being a soldier. He would simply follow the orders of Congress. He also put his foot in his mouth when he admitted to never voting in a presidential election. Then papers balked when he made the claim to a reporter that our next war will be with Germany. Though he might have been prophetic, the press at the time found the prediction preposterous. Dewey's ultimate sin, however, proved to be that he married a Catholic. Because of the bad press, Dewey withdrew his name from consideration in May of 1900. Dewey's withdrawal left the door open for William Jennings Bryan, the previous Democratic candidate, an outspoken critic of the conflict in the Philippines, and a man ready to reclaim his status as the true leader of the Democratic Party. When the Democratic Party met in Kansas City for their convention, Bryan was their obvious choice. The vote for his nomination was unanimous. Then they settled on Adlai Stevenson for vice president. Like Bryan, Stevenson was a strong proponent for the free coinage of silver, the main plank of the Democratic platform in the 1896 election. One landmark event at the 1900 Democratic National Convention was when they welcomed the first female delegate. When one of the Utah delegates was unable to serve, Elizabeth M. Cohen of Utah stepped in. She made history when she seconded the nomination of William Jennings Bryan. McKinley had sealed his second nomination long before the Republican National Convention in 1900. Prosperity in the country had been restored. The United States had won a successful war with Spain. The country was a growing empire. No other Republican dreamed of attempting to replace McKinley. Even Admiral Dewey, who had thought about running against McKinley, now endorsed him. In fact, the only person who thought McKinley should not run for a second term was McKinley himself. In September of 1899, McKinley had written, "I have had all the honor there is in this place, and have had responsibility enough to kill any man." But out of a sense of duty to the country, McKinley agreed to stand for re-election. While McKinley's renomination was a certainty, the choice for vice president was not. In late 1898, then Vice President Hobart had fallen ill with a heart condition. He had nearly collapsed on the Senate floor while delivering an address. At the time, Party Chairman Mark Hanna promised the press, "Nothing but death or an earthquake can stop the renomination of Vice President Hobart." But Hobart died on November 21, 1899. To complete the ticket for the election of 1900, Republicans would tap none other than the hero of San Juan Hill, Theodore Roosevelt. But it was not out of love for the rising political star. It was an attempt to marginalize him. Tired of ads and promos like these? Want to skip ahead to newer elections? You can listen to all episodes of American Elections Wicked Game without interruption by subscribing at intohistory.com. But not only that, you also get access to over a dozen more incredible history podcasts, also all ad-free. That includes the American Revolution podcast, a deep and thorough investigation of the times, people, and politics behind America's fight for independence. Also, the battles, because we can't start a new American nation without guns. And the American Revolution podcast tells the story of the revolution from beginning to end, from its origins in the French and Indian War, through the war itself, and on to the founding of the United States. Get American Elections Wicked Game, the American Revolutions podcast, and many others ad-free with bonus content at intohistory.com. Subscribe now at intohistory.com. Did you know you can skip ads and promos like these and listen to all episodes of American Elections Wicked Game without interruption by subscribing at intohistory.com? And not only will you be getting the whole series ad-free and bingeable, but you also get access to over a dozen more incredible history podcasts, also ad-free, like Her Half of History. Because even though Hillary Clinton may not have made history when she ran for president in 2016, there have always been women who seized power, spied for their country, created artistic masterpieces, even escaped slavery. Her Half of History is perfect for all those who sat in history class and wondered, what were the women doing all this time? Because the answer is a lot. Get Her Half of History, Wicked Game, and many others ad-free at intohistory.com. Subscribe now at intohistory.com. When Republican Chairman Mark Hanna called to order the National Convention in 1900, he said, "We are now forming our battalions under the leadership of our general, William McKinley." A roar of applause erupted for several minutes. The Republican vote for McKinley was unanimous, but with the vice presidency up for grabs.
New York Senator Thomas C. Platt nominated the hero of the Battle of San Juan Hill, but it was not out of love and respect for Theodore Roosevelt. Roosevelt had ridden his wave of fame from Cuba to the governor's mansion of New York. There, his progressive ideas worried many Republicans, and Senator Platt wanted Roosevelt out of New York politics. By placing him in the vice presidential office, Platt believed Roosevelt would do the least damage to the party and the country. Mark Hanna disagreed. He said, "Don't any of you realize there's only one life between this madman and the presidency?" Hanna did not want Roosevelt to have the nomination, and Roosevelt did not want it either. He declared so, openly and frequently, and he had said on multiple occasions that McKinley lacked a backbone. He did not wish to sabotage his own political rise by settling for a dead-end job under the thumb of a man he viewed as spineless. But Senator Platt proved to privately hate Roosevelt more than Roosevelt publicly hated the vice presidency. Determined to rid New York of the governor, Platt began a newspaper campaign to promote Roosevelt's nomination. The public welcomed the idea of nominating a war hero, and Roosevelt ultimately gave in to the wishes of Platt and the public. He agreed to accept the nomination if the convention voted for him. So behind the scenes, Platt campaigned hard for his nomination. Despite both Mark Hanna and Theodore Roosevelt's desires, Roosevelt was unanimously nominated to join McKinley's ticket. Accepting, Roosevelt said he would serve the party as a dignified non-entity for 4 years. The election of 1900 became a rematch of 1896. William Jennings Bryan and William McKinley would face off again. But this time the election was riddled with third-party challengers. In 1896, the Populist Party had abandoned nominating their own candidate to back Bryan, largely because of his pro-silver posture. But this time the Populists were split. Many again wanted to fuse with Democrats to back Bryan, but many other Populists did not, and those defectors elected to run businessman Wharton Barker. Other parties propped up their own candidates. The new anti-imperialist party also opted to back the anti-imperialist Bryan. The new Prohibition Party ran lawyer John G. Woolley. Other new parties included the National Party, the Union Reform Party, the United Christian Party, and the Social Democratic Party, famous for being the first socialist party in American history. These socialists nominated Union leader Eugene Debs, who in 1894 had been arrested during the Pullman rail boycott. But in November, none of the third-party attempts ultimately received any electoral votes. It was still a fight between McKinley and Bryan. Just as with the election of 1896, Bryan hit the campaign trail hard. He again gave a daunting 600 speeches in 24 states. He repeated his 1896 support for the free coinage of silver. He also railed against monopolies and trusts. But the issue Bryan hit McKinley hardest on was imperialism. Bryan preached that possessing lands and people without their consent betrayed the very idea of America. He called for a return to America's tradition of isolationism, and Bryan was an eloquent speaker, known for persuasively winning over a crowd. But this time, William McKinley had a secret weapon, his running mate, who knew how to dangle a carrot and hit with a big stick. In the election of 1900, Theodore Roosevelt launched a stumping tour that rivaled Bryan's. The tenacious Roosevelt made 480 stops in 23 states. He painted Bryan as a feckless coward, juxtaposing his own heroism with Bryan's apologetic foreign policy. When Bryan attacked McKinley for denying the Filipinos freedom, Roosevelt slammed Bryan's hypocrisy. How could a man cry for freedom in the Philippines while turning a blind eye to violent suppression of blacks in the South? On the economy, McKinley and Roosevelt successfully dismantled each of the Democratic Party's planks. The tariff debate, which dominated much of the previous election, became a non-issue. U.S. exports now exceeded imports. McKinley now campaigned on making reciprocal trade agreements. Bryan's push for silver, which had garnered support in 1896, now fell flat. In 1899, Congress had officially passed the Gold Standard Act and all but ended the debate over silver. McKinley promised 4 years more of the full dinner pail, a callback to his last election promise. He had made America prosperous again and pledged to continue that prosperity. For a majority of Americans, Bryan's bite no longer had any teeth. In the end, it was America's booming economy and bold expansion that made voters favor McKinley. Military victories had bolstered national pride and extended national borders. Bryan tried to cast the ongoing conflict in the Philippines as an unwinnable boondoggle, but McKinley touted troop reductions and pledged an end to the fighting within 60 days. And on the home shores, people were working, and American innovation was on the rise. In the election of 1900, Americans made their thanks known at the ballot box.
With 51.6% of the popular vote and 292 electoral votes, McKinley won an even larger victory over Bryan than in 1896. McKinley was therefore the first president since Ulysses S. Grant to win consecutive re-election. After he won, Mark Hanna told McKinley, "Your duty to the country is to live for 4 years from March." McKinley led the country into the 20th century. He was the first president to appear extensively on film and the first president to ride in an automobile. At home, American goods were ordered by catalog and were now finding new markets across the globe. By the spring of 1901, the war in the Philippines was over, giving the United States a new doorway into Asian trade. Also in early 1901, McKinley began planning a canal to be built in either Nicaragua or Panama to increase the United States' economic and naval foothold in the region. The 20th century promised to be a period of innovation and prosperity. But while most advanced in the growing economy, many in the working class did not. Some Americans were growing tired of corruption and unfair trade practices, and animosity was rising between Americans and the bursting immigrant population. Tensions were rising. It was only a matter of time before the tinderbox exploded. It's September 6, 1901 in Buffalo, New York, and the city is packed for the Pan American Exposition. The purpose of the fair is to celebrate the spirit of economic friendship throughout the Americas. It's a festival of ingenuity and adventure. President McKinley himself is in attendance. Yesterday was President's Day at the exposition, where McKinley gave what many are calling the best speech of his presidency. Today, the president is holding a reception in the Temple of Music. A great crowd has gathered for a chance to meet the president, but one of the men in charge of security is a bit worried. "Mr. President, I believe this crowd is too great. We may not be able to keep them at bay." "Nonsense. I'm sure they will stay orderly. I don't want to deprive them of a chance to meet their president." McKinley turns and smiles at the crowd. He begins pressing forward to shake hands with the head of the American empire. In front, a man leads his little girl up to the president, who offers her tiny hand. "Well, hello there, little one. I hope you're enjoying the fair." As they leave, the president smiles and waves goodbye to the little girl. Next in line comes a boyish-featured man with a bandaged right hand. He sheepishly steps forward to the president, but a short Italian man pushes past him. Secret Service Detective Geary keeps a close eye on the Italian. He has a menacing look, which Geary regards with suspicion. The Italian aggressively shakes the president's hand. "Oh, that's quite a grip you have there, sir. Hands like these only come from hard work, and that's what makes this country great." The Italian grips the president's hand so long that Detective Geary must step forward to break the clasp. "All right, that's enough. Let's move it along." Geary guides the Italian past to allow the next man, the one with the innocent face and bandaged hand, a chance to meet the president. The young man steps forward. The president smiles and, noting the injured right hand, reaches out to take the man's left. But before their hands meet, 2 gunshots strike the president. The first grazing his chest, the second in the stomach. The innocent-looking young man is self-proclaimed anarchist Leon Czolgosz, and the bandage on his hand concealed a revolver. McKinley sinks back into the arms of Detective Geary. "Am I shot?" Geary seats the president back into a chair, unbuttons his vest. He sees nothing but blood. "Yes, I fear you are, Mr. President." The man directly behind the assassin is a hulking 6'4" black waiter named James F. Parker. He quickly knocks the pistol from the assassin's grip, and with a powerful punch, he spins the assassin around like a top. A third blow breaks the assassin's nose, and a fourth knocks out several teeth. From his chair, the president raises his right hand, red with his own blood, and cries out, "Let no one hurt him!" On the president's orders, Geary and other officers tear the hulking Parker away from the assassin. The crowd cries for a lynching. Soldiers and police beat them back and pull Czolgosz away. The officers ask him why he tried to kill the president. He says it's because he's an anarchist. It was his duty. 8 days after the shooting, the president was dead of gangrene. Theodore Roosevelt rose to the highest office in the land. But Roosevelt was a progressive, and the Republican establishment feared what that would mean for the party and the country. Mark Hanna exclaimed, "Now look, that damn cowboy is president of the United States." Roosevelt would spend the next 4 years attacking big business, corruption, and the establishment, which tried to fight back. In the election of 1904, they would try to buy Roosevelt's allegiance, but the establishment would learn a hard lesson.
That damn cowboy was not for sale. This is episode 29 of American Elections Wicked Game, 1900, The Rise and Fall of Empires. On the next episode, the election of 1904, as Theodore Teddy Roosevelt fights to shed the mantle of accidental president. The forces of opposition on Wall Street and in the Democratic Party seek to deny Teddy another 4 years in the White House. If you're a careful Wicked Game listener, you know in the credits I mentioned my friend Professor Greg Jackson and his podcast, History That Doesn't Suck. It's a great show. But one way it can doesn't suck even more is when you listen to it without ads. You can listen to all episodes of American Elections Wicked Game, all episodes of History That Doesn't Suck, and all episodes of many more great history podcasts without interruption by subscribing at intohistory.com. History That Doesn't Suck is a deeply researched chronological survey of American history from a trained academic who also knows how to tell a story. Plus, in addition to ad-free listening to one of the best American history podcasts out there, you get scores of bonus episodes at intohistory.com. Subscribe now at intohistory.com. This episode contains reenactments and dramatized details. And while in most cases we can't know exactly what was said, all our dramatizations are based on historical research. American Elections Wicked Game is an Airship production, hosted, edited, and executive produced by me, Lindsey Graham. Sound design by Derek Behrens. Music by Lindsey Graham. Co-executive produced by Stephen Walters in association with Ritual Productions. Written and researched by Eric Archilla. Fact-checking by Greg Jackson and CL Salazar from the podcast History That Doesn't Suck.
We all love pop culture, but you know what? It can be exhausting. And you know what there isn't enough of is actually funny working comedians talking about all the stuff that we love. And, to be honest, love to hate. From what's trending online with celebrities to what's trending online, well, because TikTok told us so. Hi guys, I'm comedian Justin Martindale, the host of the Just Saying podcast with Justin Martindale on the Comedy Store Network, the mecca of comedy. And each week I sit down with some of the funniest people you know, and we talk about all of the things happening right now in pop culture. And we have the best guests, from Leslie Jones to Katya to Zainab Johnson and Pete Holmes. We have them all. We break down the hottest stories, the drama, and are unafraid doing so and say what everybody else is thinking. Just Saying with Justin Martindale, coming to you live on the Sunset Strip from the Comedy Store in West Hollywood. So check us out on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you there. You won't be disappointed. Just saying.